Sitting in this garden right now, it's hard to remember the winter, but it was tough. And I'm sure other gardeners did exactly what I did. The minute it starts to get cold and the plants start to die, we start to dream and plan of next year's garden. I know for me, I start to look at all sorts of magazines and websites looking for inspiration. The first thing I order are the spring bulbs to be planted in the fall. The next are the seeds, and then I start making lists of plants that I want to order but can't because everything's closed until February. Planning and dreaming for next year's garden is the only way that I can get through a long, cold Canadian winter. Last year was no exception, but it was even more intense because we were planning on moving our whole vegetable garden. Not only did I not have a place to plant the plants that I was ordering, I didn't have the greenhouse yet in which I was going to start the seeds earlier than normal. And the greenhouse was the foundation of the whole new dream garden. However, that didn't stop me. Because I am a little crazy, I started the process doing something I had never done before, cold stratification of seeds. Because I wasn't just planning a vegetable garden, I was also researching what native flowers would work in our area and soil. It's a goal of mine to try and introduce more and more native plants throughout the yard in order to encourage more wildlife and pollinators. And a lot of native perennial flowers, so I've learned, need to be planted in November so that they can go through the full winter season before they germinate. So after I bought some fun new seed trays from a company called Indoor Farmer in BC, I ordered some native seeds from a local place nearby and started the experiment. If you read about cold stratification online, you will find out that you can do this in the fall, or you can put the seeds in your fridge for a couple of months before the last frost. I tried both, and outside worked the best. The hardest part was finding a place to put them over the winter and then protecting the trays from the squirrels and the birds. With spring came the rush to get the greenhouse functional so I could then start planting all the seeds I had purchased months before. Once the windows were in, the greenhouse warmed up really quickly and the push to get everything planted was on. But even though all the seeds I planted were growing well, the cold spring was delaying the final and essential step of this process: building the vegetable beds. Because I was so worried about getting everything done in time, I started building the beds way back in February. Though it seemed a little silly at the time, it did ease the load come spring. We built the 4 by 8 foot beds out of cedar and ash boards that we had left over from other projects. They were cut to size, stained with a food-grade water sealant, and then stacked indoors. Finally, in May, after we had prepped the garden surface, I was able to build the beds. Since we didn't have enough wood for the 5 beds we planned for, we purchased a prefabricated metal raised bed to see how it would work. They don't match, but the plants don't care, and I don't either. Each bed was then lined with sticks, leaves, triple mix, and then a special pro mix for veggies. Everything was ready to go except the fence around the garden, and that was essential. For the full story about the outer fence, check my other video on the Red Door Garden playlist. It was a really hard physical push to get the fence complete, but I really wanted it done before it started to heat up. I was also running out of space in the greenhouse. Meanwhile, we got to have our first success. Many years ago, I built a custom cover for one of my beds, and amazingly, it had survived the harsh winter, so I was able to plant out my spinach, kale, arugula, and radishes first. And we had a couple of harvests of some of the best tasting veggies that we've had in years. If nothing else goes well, those first few weeks of fresh spinach and kale will define this year's harvest. At long last, the fence was done, and I could plant out the rest of the vegetables. Despite having done this for over 5 years, every time I plant out these tiny little seedlings, I just can't imagine they will actually get big and produce vegetables, but they always do. However, this year is a little different. I usually have about 10 tomato plants. This year, I have close to 50, mostly started from seed, and this was not planned. But when I plant the seeds, I have no idea how many will take, so I tend to overplant. I tried giving them away, but only a few were taken. So now it is a bit of an experiment to see which location does best. Afternoon sun, morning sun, near the greenhouse, containers. I'm also a believer in companion planting. So around the beds are herbs and flowers that I've read help keep the pests at bay. I've planted yarrow, calendula, geraniums, borage, marigolds, nasturtium, oregano, thyme, lavender, parsley, dill, cilantro, and lots of basil. Of course, there's the double benefit of these plants. You can eat some of the flowers, and we've made pesto out of not just basil, but dill, cilantro, and arugula. Pesto can be made out of almost anything. So it's now July, and while the spinach and kale are done because of the heat, and we are waiting on the tomatoes and peppers, the zucchini have been great, and we've had a couple of harvests of beans and beets. Not to mention the garlic was just harvested. There are a few other experiments new to me growing experiences like kohlrabi and loofah, and trying to get my acorn squash to grow up instead of out. And then there are those native perennials I spoke of. All those tiny seeds created oh so many plants. I was able to find a place to plant most of them, but I plan on making new spaces in different parts of the garden available, and those future homes aren't ready yet. So they remain in the greenhouse, being potted on when they get too big and watered almost daily. But not as all perfect in this paradise. On top of all the work to keep out the rabbits, my new roses suffered an attack of some crawling pest that turned the flowers brown and all the leaves dropped off. So I decided to cut them back to the ground. They are growing again, but I wonder if they're hardy enough for this environment. The first tomatoes to appear have blossom rot, most likely because we had a dry June and our watering system wasn't working yet. I'm hoping the next bunch will be healthier, but that's only if I can keep off the hornworm caterpillar who can devour a tomato plant in one day. I have very happily removed them and fed them to the birds, and I have noticed a few parasitic wasps that have taken note, so that's a bonus. But it means I have to check the plants daily. To say this planting season was intense is an extreme understatement. The amount of work required to move the garden and then all the planting I wanted to do meant that I was working 6 days a week, and it tortured my back and knees. So was it worth it? There's so many challenges and variables involved in gardening that sometimes I wonder why I keep coming back to it. It could be the successes like incredible spinach, buttery soft kale, and so many tomatoes that you don't know what to do with them. But sometimes those successes are hard to remember. I equate it to like the success of a really great golf shot. You know, when the club and the ball hit just so perfectly and then the ball goes in the hole? It's incredible. But with gardening, it doesn't take seconds for those successes to happen. It takes days or weeks or sometimes years. And to be honest, sometimes we forget what we are trying to accomplish. Everything about gardening is about patience, learning from experience, living with imperfections, and then spending a lot of time planning to make it better next year. This year in particular has been exhausting and at times utterly demoralizing. I have seriously questioned my sanity. But next year will be different. Next year we won't have the garden to build. It'll just be about the planting. It'll be a totally different experience. I've already started taking notes and making plans. So yes, I am a glutton for punishment. But seriously, there is nothing as good as eating vegetables straight from the garden. Do you think we could get Advil to sponsor this project? Or maybe a distillery? Do you think Ryan Reynolds would take my call?